Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing Live show number 357. I am your host, Lauren Gray, and thank you so much for joining us this Friday morning, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. If you are watching us on our many simulcasted platforms, welcome to everyone that is watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and of course, our TV channel, Hospitality Channel, which you can find on your Roku TV, Google TV, Apple TV, and Amazon Prime TV. There are Fire Sticks and so forth. Plus, also, perhaps by chance, you're watching us on our app, which is on both Apple iOS and also Android Google Play. So, for that, now that you know where every place we are, thank you and welcome. Our topic today, single topic discussion today, came out of the fact that we are gearing into more and more conferences. Thankfully, in that sense, because we have been long overdue in getting the chance to be together personally. We have discussed in shows past the value proposition of creating in person versus online and the hybrids in between all of those. Most of the conferences we'll be speaking about today are in person only on purpose for them, from their perspective, to help solicit attendance because of the value proposition of networking at those events and just the logistics of trying to create a hybrid example of the conference is still technologically challenging for some platforms to do this. However, all that being said, I thought we'd take a little bit look at the fact that we've had Google's conference, their developers conference, just roll through. We talked a little bit about it 2 weeks ago and showed number 355 as to the geospatial API as being our key point of interest for Google's. Apple's rolled through their developers conference just recently and had a few extra tools that they were adding in. So our topic today, which I'm sorry I did not say earlier before I started this rambling of it, is the real impact of new tech and conference announcements. For those of us who are watching in APAC, I do hope for those of us who normally watch us on the HSMAI's Asian Pacific Facebook page that you are actually in personal attendance to the Singapore ROC Conference, Revenue Optimization Conference, or you are joining them on their hybrid version of that, which is the Hey Summit platform for the virtual conference coverage of them today, which will be the second day of the event. So hopefully the first day was wonderful and enjoyable, and you're totally into the fact that you finally get to be in person with a lot of your peers to discuss a lot of the stuff that is related to regionally interest categories. And we're going to touch a little bit on some of the topics that were presented in the agenda for you for yesterday and today. Upcoming, I get to finally say, we're going to be covering live, as we used to do 2 years ago and beyond, earlier than that, HSMAI's ROC Conference and HSMAI's Marketing Conference. They call it the Commercial Marketing Strategy Conference. They're calling that for the entire week. They're in collusion with High Tech, as they have been for a number of years, at least with ROC. And so now they've put them all together into one large push, which is their Commercial Marketing Week, in collaboration with HFTP and High Tech. They're a very large technology conference, which I'm looking forward to attending also, and press coverage. Still pending on the approval of being able to cover that live as well, working through the logistics of that. But HSMA has allowed us to go back into our saddle, so to speak, and cover live the two conferences, both ROC and the Marketing Conference. With that being said, I thought it very interesting, some of the things topically that they had put into the session listings. Very fascinating stuff. I'd like to go through some of the things to anticipate for it. That is happening starting June 28th for HSMI's project. That is where the ROC Conference, Marketing Strategy Conference comes in. And then Wednesday is the ROC Conference. First, I want to get to some of the tech stuff that has been recently rolled out that will have an impact to us. If you haven't noticed or have just been accepting the fact of what's been going on, we still are rambling through the impact of the isolation that COVID created for over 2 years, the change in our society, the change and impact of how we deal with things in society. And for that reason, a lot of things have turned touchless, personally interactive, where instead of having to engage with people to derive answers to things or information, more and more technology is rolling in that kind of created autonomy to being able to discover certain things. Apple's no exception to that. Apple, of course, being its own ecosystem, You have to wait for Apple to come up with these things. You just can't say, "Oh, that's on Google's Android. I should be able to get it on Apple." Not always the case. There are some things that have rolled through from Apple. Um, One of the ones that they pointed out is a thing called live text. Um, what happens with this, the live text feature, uh, you can take pictures of things. And now Google people have used this for a while with Google goggles and so forth. Um, and you can search picture types or find your location type and or convert things type. Again, Apple is trying to rebalance itself to what has been functionally available in Google for a while. As we know from traveling technology wise, Google has had its translate capability, which I've used countless times, especially when I was going to China. Being able to see a sign, not even know what the sign is for, hold up your phone's camera, and it would translate the sign to the language of your choice, main being English, to understand what the sign was for. Also, too, and it has gotten so much better, live audio translations, where as you hear someone, you can hold your phone up and the phone will listen to them and translate it in text into the language of your choice, mine being English again. And or now they've gotten fast enough with their Android products that they can hear and then audibly put it in a bud, translated it in audio format. So as somebody's speaking in French, you and your earbud, okay, can hear it in your choice of language, which makes it fascinating because now it changes the ability to interact in a more personal way rather than, and then this goes back to my age, whenever I did travel internationally back before any of this was even possible, you at best had a phrase book. Fortunately, I had a wife that spoke multiple languages. Uh, but a phrase book where you would learn certain phrases like baños, very important one in Spanish. Cerveza, another one important in Spanish. But it was juxted and you didn't get the full, and it was always tolerated if at best. And you never really got to enjoy the immersiveness of where you were because you were always at a disadvantage for understanding everything that was happening around you, both from a language perspective. Well, technology has caught up with us in a very large degree with this, where we're able to now interact in real time, not only to translate the languages, translate the signage, but also visually, Apple now joining the group along with Google in ability to identify via pictures and looking at things to convert things to things that you want to convert to. Like if you're looking at British pounds and you see a price tag on uh, a sign in a grocery store while you're in United Kingdom, you can change it into the currency equivalent to that you would have a better reference to understanding those kind of things. Makes it incredibly fascinating that it has that ability. Again, Google's been doing this for a while. I've used it for menus and so forth. Apple is now to the point where they're offering it as a part of their process with the use of their camera. Some other things that I think are turning incredibly valuable, with the caveat being it also creates interesting potential issues otherwise, is official IDs. Um, there is two states, Arizona and Maryland, that have the ability to use digital IDs instead of carrying your actual driver's license around. You can use a digital wallet in your Apple Wallet or Google Play, Android, that will be acceptable to law enforcement. Um, this in-app ID verification is very cool because they've finally bridged the fact that if you can pull up the ID on the phone, it means the ID configured for that phone for that ID is legitimized. You know, and my first question to it was, well, what if you scanned somebody else's driver's license and put it into your phone, and just because you can open it up doesn't make it yours? No, it actually, there's an authentication process that goes with it to make sure that the information that is stored on that phone that is triggered by your identification that the phone does, like Face ID and so forth, that it only opens up your authenticated IDs. Now, I know I've been running around with a uh, COVID vaccination card on my phone for a long time that is accepted legitimately in most places, but not in all places. They still want the cardboard piece of card that you have that says dates and times of the vaccines that you've taken. Now, there's 11 other states that are working with the ability to use digital IDs. Obviously, it's not widely adopted totally yet, so it's not as if unless you're in one of those states and know absolutely positively that by carrying only your phone you have a legitimate ID, um, you're always going to have to carry your subsequent backup. And just like when we went through the transition of being able to use your phones to board and get your boarding onto a plane, For a very long period of time, I still printed out a paper copy of it because there was still technology issues at the time. The phone couldn't connect to the internet, the phone battery died, or whatever, and all of a sudden I can't get on the plane because I literally can't legitimize my boarding, or I have to wait off to the side until everybody else boards for them to take the extra time it takes to identify me so that they can issue me a correct boarding pass to get on the plane. It was a long time of that transition process. Now, don't even bother with printing stuff. It's literally all the apps for the airlines and so forth push over your ID to you. I can have it on my watch, which I thought was so cool when I first did that, put my watch on the screen and so forth. And it has created a much easier solution and probably saved a whole mess of trees in the process by having this kind of technology go in. This is where we see a lot of this in app ID verification kind of coming through. Another one is Apple is dealing with more and more, especially specifically Hyatt at this point, of being able to put digital keys in your wallet. Now, if anybody's tried the Hilton keys, the Marriott keys, the room keys, and so forth, one, only certain hotels have that ability. Two, not always was it a true, it worked all the time. As a matter of fact, it worked some of the time. For the times that I tried it, it's gotten better since I first started traveling again. That's like, oh, these worked a little bit better. It's obviously improvement upon technology. Um, I don't like the fact that if I check in, my wife and I, to the same room, that we both can't have a key. It was only allowing us one of us to have a key, me, because I was the main person. And yes, we had their name on the room and everything else, but they couldn't. The app would not allow for more than one phone to have a key. No, it didn't work all the time, even now, where the communication between my phone and the door was slow, or if not at all. That's about the best I got from it. I know it'll continue to improve, and this high tech conference coming up, it should be a fun see as to what technology is being rolled out that make that greater and easier to do, and how well it can be improved upon. But it is nice that it's going in that direction because, again, and right now the existence of it is in a phone format. We know that that's going to transition to something else in the future tense. Uh, Having this all in one capability with your phone reduces all the variety of things that you clutter yourself in your pockets with. Phone is your ID, your phone is your key, your phone is your transaction point. It's all very cool that all these things are going into one place, and we're getting more and more used to it. We had a fun discussion with friends of ours where we went through the advantages of always having some cash with you in some way. Just for if it boils down to the fact that you've broken down, you need to give somebody money to say thank you for having helped or something. Um, and it was discussed that, well, that's not even true anymore either, because most people have a Venmo or account, personal finance account like that. That literally it's like, I'll give you this 10 bucks, 20 bucks for this, boom. And you scan the other person's QR code, money goes to their account. So even that functionality of the legitimacy of carrying, oh, I need coins for toll booths. We all know, based specifically, what accelerated this was COVID. In fact, they wouldn't put people in booths. A lot of these places spent the time to upgrade their technology so that even if you don't have a tag that is represented to have paid the toll for that gate, they can read your license plate to make sure that you still can go through, and they'll just charge you, albeit a little bit more price, or a lot more price, for not having a legitimate card to say that you can get the discount price. But again, the technology is caught up with it on that sense. Um, some of the other things that is neat is some of they have Apple put out the on the go dictation updates. Uh, you can have it where the phone will read to you. I know for me in the car, when my phone connects to the car now, I have a newer car, and it can read me the text. If I find it so critical, number one, that I have to actually know what the text is while I'm driving, most of the time it's like, I'll get back to it. I'm not really worried about it. But if it's a high priority person in your family, or you're waiting for something in particular to come through and you're driving at the time that's coming through, you can have it speak it back. Well, Apple's now incorporated that into the ability to answer back as well, where you can speak back and it will actually put proper punctuation and make it look a lot better than when you do your dictation into it, where you have done. It's like, that's not quite what I said. And then it goes back in a whole different format. So it's improved upon the on the go dictation updates. Um, Order tracking, keeping track of things. Uh, we know that Amazon's done a phenomenal job of letting you know roughly where it's at, or where it's in process, or if it's out that day or arriving that day, or what have you. Um, but that service expansion was not available to every place that is dealing with those things. If you deal with a local pharmacist and their delivery cycle, if you dealt with local product that's on a delivery cycle, a lot of them didn't have the technology capabilities to keep you status as to what is happening with the delivery. Now there's platform availability in the developers side of Apple that allows you to create better order tracking for anything that you have that service requirement for. Another interesting thing, which kind of goes to our show number 354, we talked about on point of sale transaction financing. And we were talking about all the variations that are coming to market for this. Apple has stepped into this, and they have Apple Pay Later. Um, which is it can be as long as 6 weeks. What this does is with the Apple Pay program, the Apple Card that you get, which they make it even easier and easier and easier to go over and get one, um, you can do a pay later function based on once you submit your request for Apple Pay, they determine what your risk factor is, and they allow you the options of paying later. Um, this is for obviously the fact that we're dealing with very constrained budgets for people, and that sometimes the purchases land at times that are not convenient for the cash flow for it to be paid all in full at once. We talked about in show 354 about the value proposition of having a delay factor for purchases so that people can buy their trip because of the increased cost of their trip and not get hit for the very large sum of a payment for it and stretch it out, in that case, months of payment at a pretty hefty interest rate, by the way. We talked about that as well on the show. Please go back and listen to the show. It was really great for that, or look at the show notes. Um, to talk about the ability to then afford to take advantage of what they want to do for travel without the financial impact of cash flow. Apple's looking at the same way, saying, you know what, there are times where this purchase item price would put a difficult pinch on the daily cash flow finances. So therefore, let's just do a pay later. Some of the positives we talked about on the show, and we're reiterating it today, is rather than go through the credit requirements of these other delay programs that will go for months and months, you just need a buffer of a few weeks. You just need to roll through certain cycles of pay versus output of expenses, and those few weeks are helpful. And I think Apple's looking at it that way, going, you know what, this is easy to roll, so you're not worrying about overdrafting and what have you for those people that keep a tight credit line or tight cash flow in that process. Other stuff, they're more aesthetics and so forth about how they're changing the ability to customize aspects of the phone, the lock screen, and so forth. But one of the things that I like is the notification processes that are revamped with more of a status inquiry. And I think about the example they actually give is like Uber, or it's showing a progress where you don't have to have the app open. If anybody's ever used Uber as much, um, you're watching the little car on the little map move, and you're constantly hitting the screen to keep it alive to see where the car is to know when it's close enough to be worried about it. Here, it's a notification that pops up with the interactive content as to where it is in relationship to its progress. So it's like a little progress bar for you so that you feel better knowing what's going on without having to unlock your phone every time or keep it out the whole time or stare at it the whole time. It can keep you notified in a more robust way for it. Again, that helps with the travel aspect of it. Also, Apple Maps is really, I don't know if they'll ever catch up to Google Maps for all the things that Google has learned and done so well. But visually, they're much more enjoyable. And to be honest with you, I begin to use Apple Maps for an aesthetic value of more interactivity. Their content and their graphics and the visualization of the map and your interaction with the map, I find more enjoyable. I find that I see more of what's related to my surrounding areas than the way the Google Maps present this. Even though Google Maps has the dimensional buildings and so forth into it, I still have challenges with the fact that Apple seems to want to drive me to places in a more traditional direction format and doesn't really know the best way oftentimes, or the more updated way, that it'll make me go down the road and take a U-turn to take a left when there's a left-hand turn place that I can turn in without having to do the U-turn thing. Little things like that always keep me thinking that Apple is still massively trying to keep up or catch up with Google Maps. But as we know with Google Maps, they've added even more things. Live View, we talked about this on last week's show with the geospatial API that they just rolled out with. Neat things like that are going to even only make Google Maps better. Their ability to add more content to their local and their maps and their be aware ofs and their business cycles and how busy is it and all that other kind of stuff is pretty valuable to that. with all things, we talked about, and this goes back actually a few years. We talked about why Microsoft was so adamant about getting into cars, and Apple Play has really come into its own in a lot of ways. Where and Google, all of them are pushing into the technology that connects to the car. They're more robust now. There's more information to them now. There's more capability of them now to interact with the car, so that it's more than just a partial representation of your phone in the car environment, and maps are still wonky or hard. Now it's almost a full, like, you bring your phone in, it brings the brains to the car, and it adds a lot more depth and information, live weather, um, things that are on the maps that are easier to engage with. It really helps with how well the car can assist in your travel. Um, Golly, just other little things. Your phone can turn into a webcam, so forth. It is really neat, the things that they have rolled out. I'm more excited about what is yet to come, which is going to be the AR VR headsets from Apple. I'm going to find it very interesting to see how Apple keeps everything in their ecosystem, since there's such large platforms already in existence in VR, with Steam and SideQuest and Quest, and of course Meta being the lion's share of all VR activity. And they're rolling out new headsets as well. They're Cambry and so forth. Again, if you're interested in those kind of conversations, show 353 actually talked a lot about VR and the use of VR and AR in hospitality. So those were some of the tech geeky things that have kind of rolled out. We already covered Google last week about some of the stuff. The biggest thing is, again, I'm very excited about, is the geospatial API, which is phenomenal in its usabilities. And I think it's going to be more exciting as we see more and more things get used for it. Some of the things I like to talk about is the conferences that are rolling through. Now, we have, as I said, the Rock conference in Singapore for HSMI Asia. Um, it is interesting to see how we're trying to catch up with the things that we haven't been in person dialoguing about, and then what things are truly valuable versus things that are interesting, emerging stuff that isn't quite impactful to our market as of yet. I say this with the caveat that I think some things in these agendas are for impact effect and aren't really as tied to usability quite yet. More particular, and believe me, I'm not talking about HSMI Asia Pacific and or HSMAI's marketing conference at this point, although they're peppered into some of their dialogue as well. But in other conferences I'm seeing, there's a lot of discussion still about metaverse. Now, less about the bitcoins and blockchains and so forth, because I think we exhausted the buzz factor on those things. In all honesty, it's people are hearing the same thing over and over. So people are not as interested in knowing what's next, because nothing really next is being discussed, especially considering that the market itself right now for things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and so forth are in such a question mark as to validated value and NFTs and their validated usage and so forth. But discussing the metaverse, discussing hotels, creating virtual hotels in the metaverse, virtual services in the metaverse, and so forth. I think it's a bit of a grain of salt in the combinations of what to know about it for awareness and what to worry about it in the sense of implementation. If a hotel is looking to create a metaverse hotel, in the metaverse without doing all the things that it needs to do in the real world, for marketing and optimization of services and what have you, it is a misguided priority. Um, these things should be made aware of. It's not that you should be ignorant of these things developing and happening and what's happening in their development, but being focused on what you can do with it now when you're sacrificing the other things that should be done is not a good combination. So when you see things like this on agendas of conferences, it's wonderful FYI. It's wonderful, wonder if and how about when, and isn't that going to be cool if? That's all real cool. But if you're balancing going to those presentations compared to the fundamental revenue strategies of a high yield demand, low market penetration problem, I'd kind of go to the latter before I'd go to the prior. The reason being is that if you're going to these conferences, one, I think the highest priority of the conferences is the networking capability that we've been starving for 2 years plus. That hands down is the key catalyst to going. Critically important, absolutely vital, thoroughly enjoyable, totally looking forward, with the caveat of being safe. Because COVID didn't go away just because we thought it went away. COVID didn't go away because we relaxed rules. It was a lot of pressures of people fighting a losing battle and trying to convince people to be concerned with it because of the stress that it creates and the fatigue that it creates. All justifiable reasons, plus also a lot of other ones that are miscellaneously bad. Um, but it didn't go away. It's still in multi variations. I still know people that have had COVID multiple times because they've not got vaccinated and they keep getting the latest iterations of it. Fortunately for them, they don't have a severe impact of them. But the idea of, well, I just got COVID, so I'm immune to it is not a valid relationship to the fact that there's variations out there. All that being brought up in the context of going to these in person events, they'll have the insurance disclaimer that says, hey, be safe and take precautions, but they're not enforcing anything or will force anything to be enforced. So it's up to your own demise as to what you do, which is it should always be. That's our personal choices to make these things. So going to conferences have the balance of, if you are in the category of people that have to be overtly concerned as to the potential exposure and the impact of that exposure to you in getting sick, that is a viable metric to consider in going to these conferences. If you find yourself tolerant of that and or vaccinated to it and feel comfortable that you can, whatever happens doesn't happen severely and so forth, then it is a wonderful time to go to these conferences and get to see the people you haven't seen for a couple of years. A lot of those people are either in different jobs, and unfortunately, a good chunk of them aren't in the industry anymore. So there's new faces and places to all this. Everyone in these conferences, because of their newness back into the market, are going to put on their best shiny foot to come into market to show you all the cool stuff of why you need to consider them. A lot of people are in roles that they're responsible for stuff. This is their first chance to kind of walk out with that title over their head. Uh, and for that reason, a whole lot of interest into walking around and learning stuff that they can show and be productive in their new roles. So there's going to be a lot of neat new dynamics to these conferences. And I say that particularly of high tech. There have been other conferences that have rolled through. Um, and they've started and they've been interesting to a degree, but they've been very niched as to their interest. High tech is really a big fat footprint of, this is all the cool stuff that's going on in hospitality when it comes to technology right now. HSMI has augmented that for their marketing and their rock conference into, here are the unique features that are related to marketing and the unique features related to revenue optimization. I find it's going to be fascinating. I think a lot of the interesting things that are going to come out of Rock for APAC now, this being their second day, final day for the program, is what was the impact of some of their content. Um, there's, I find that what Jackie, who is the director for HSMI APAC, put together for agenda items was really, really cool on identifying specific task to solution combinations. Um, she referred more about action items and functions of, this has now happened. What do you do about it? This is the new normal, or this is normal now. Okay. What is it that has changed since before? She was very good about X versus Y or cause and effect when it came to the topics to all of this. And nice other peppering in of some of the stuff I talked about, where the metaverse is explained. You know, again, it's a point of, here is what you need to know, but don't worry about it yet. The content that I think you should be worrisome of is where the content is in contrast to something you should be participating in, and or that they are telling you what you need to do about it, when it's really one of those way ahead of where you do something about it kind of conversations. So very much a credit to Jackie and her team for putting together what I think is a really neat combination of actionable items and or issues and addressment of those issues, cause and effect kind of stuff through the course of their entire agenda, which I think is really, really cool. Um, Going to now things that are going on at the end, towards the end of this month, which we'll be covering live. Now, we're not going to go into the sessions and broadcast them. That is for the benefit of those that paid for attendance. We will, however, take a full advantage of the opportunity to debrief with people, hopefully some of the speakers themselves, after they've given their presentations, as to what their intent was or the feedback that people have about what they were presented to, in a way to give you all a sense of what was presented at this. Now, unlike the HSMI APAC, which did a hybrid, both online and in person, because they have different logistics. They have countries that still have mandates about their ability to travel, and so it made it difficult for people to physically participate at the conference as they would like to. And also, there's, as with everybody, labor limitations. And for the people that would be most suited to go to the conference, they simply didn't have the available flexibility of time to make it to the conference. These are all considerations of running a conference, really, which was the inspiration for her to add a virtual aspect to the conference as well, to ensure that the content made it to the right people, even though they couldn't physically attend and enjoy the benefit of networking while there. HSMAI Americas is full all in-person attendance. So if you're not there, you will not get aspects to the sessions. I'm not clear as to if they're planning on. I do know that they record their sessions. I don't know if they're going to end up eventually over time distributing excerpts and/or aspects of the presentations as made. But this is definitely, you're not there, you don't get it. So it is very, very important to join for the things that you find worthy of being there for. Plus, it is a neat combination of being able to go to high tech, go to rock, go to the marketing conference. It's worth the time allotment because you're getting a massive bang for your buck. It's in Orlando, easy to get to. Plenty of hotels in Orlando, as anybody knows. But we are, of course, in the world where everything costs. Um, the sessions themselves are, I think, very well thought through. One of the sessions that I've always enjoyed in relationship to the marketing strategy conference, before it was the digital marketing and before that was e-commerce, um, was the lightning round. The lightning round has turned into a favor for everybody because it gets past the clutter of storyline dialogue that a lot of presentations have: predication, explanation, identification, solution, implementation, conclusion. This lightning round is about targeted, this causes, this solves. It's very concise, it's timed and paced, so that it is, you only have the 6 minutes from 40 seconds, I believe, to do your segment. So you step straight into it. And the pace of the presentation is timed and set. So you can't, if you don't keep up with the pace of your presentation, what you talk about changes to what is visual. So it's it's a lot harder than it looks. Let's put it that way. Um, I have to say that I did like Captain Kirk did on the Kobayashi Maru. I modified the rules. I actually changed the cadence of each of the slides to fit what I wanted to say about the slide, rather than all the slides being the same time, equal distance of time. Not a bad change, just a needed change for my ramblings. But it was incredibly hard. And everybody you talk to that has done a lightning round presentation will tell you it is one of the hardest presentations to make, because you don't have the luxury of losing your marker in your conversation and getting back to it. If you lose your cadence or you lose your thought, you are out of sync with what you had planned for the condensed amount of time that you were allotted. Incredibly insightful content, absolutely a must see in that sense. It is a keynote. There is no other events going on when they do the lightning round. It is a dedicated, everybody should be paying attention to it kind of thing. Uh, with HSMI Marketing Conference, as with Rock, there is keynote sessions and then there's breakout sessions. They tend to run 3 tracks on average, so that they can get as much content variation available for the short window of time that the conference is running as possible. What this does create, however, is a challenge on prioritization. You might find yourself where all 3 presentations at the same time are exactly what you'd want to see. However, you can't attend all 3. This is where team attendance is so valuable, because if you have enough team members together, then you don't miss any of them, because what one team member has will be shared back with the team after they would see the presentation. That's why it's so enjoyable to bring multiple people from your organization, because you get the chance to not miss anything, which is a key component to a lot of these things, because a lot of the session breakouts are excellent at every breakout. It's unfortunately a priority of which one to hit and which one to miss if you're there by yourself. I have noticed one thing that they have done, not knowing if it's on purpose or just from a content necessity. They did repeat a breakout session. Fortunately, this one I think is more for informational, so that it seems good enough to repeat. and they have a hotel marketer's guide to the metaverse, and it repeats at another session, breakout session time period slot later in the day. Um, I think that's interesting. I don't know why this topic was picked, other than its buzzworthiness. I'll be happy to find that out when I get to attend and cover this live as to why this was so important to be repeated, or it was just a nice common one that people didn't want to miss out on. Not sure. We'll find out more about that when we get there. I noticed that there are dialogues of things like reflagging and opening and relaunching. I think a lot of people are wanting to know, what do I do if I want to clean the slate and get restarted, or change what it is that I am a part of, flag above the building, and or whether I have a flag above the building, or I took the time to renovate during the downtime, or what have you. How do I emerge back into market? So I find it very fascinating that it is a strong point of context for not just this conference, but in others that I'm looking at, that there's this, what do I do now, or how do I handle these kind of things? Also, regrettably, but very realistically, is covering things like staffing shortages. How can we compensate for the reduction of team members, for the service levels that are going to be expected for the prices we're asking? I like the fact too that with HSMAI, they have brought together the fact that they're going to deal with marketing and revenue management as they relate together. This has been a persistent conversation that goes back many, many years when had the privilege of running around with Bunny Buckheiser, Fran Brasso, Jenny Thiessen, when we were doing the Rocket series for HSMAI, and we're going city to city evangelizing the convergence, revenue optimization, convergence, education, and training of revenue management and marketing, the need to collaborate between the two disciplines. It's nice to see that not only is that a baseline of conversation now, but it is actually a reflection in their conference strategy that they are symbiotic to each other, that it's good to have both of them together, because unlike how it was perceived in times past, I'm not referring just to HSM, I'm referring to the industry, is revenue managers were over here and they did the revenue management stuff and they went to revenue management conferences, and marketers were over here and they went to marketing conferences and they did their stuff over there. And then hopefully back at their home base, there was some sort of dialogue between what they did, learned, and discovered in their different sessions. Now there is a convergence where marketing and revenue management conferences are together, so that the same teams, revenue and marketing, can literally go to both events to see how the other perspective priority affects their priority, and vice versa. And I find that to be incredibly valuable and incredibly well thought, to put the two together so that a marketer can understand revenue when they go to the revenue conference, and a revenue manager can understand marketing when they go to the marketing conference. I think it's very powerful that they put those two together. So kudos to Bob and the team, Julie and Jason, for doing all that. So that's kind of, there. I think some of the keynote sessions are interesting, but and this has nothing to do with HSMI in particular, but it's a reflection of what I'm about to say. Conferences inherently are a half step off from what is actually happening at the moment the conference attends, and that is just a logistics issue. Early on, these conferences, having been in chair of these conferences for years with HSMI and other organizations, um, there's a process that usually is at least 12 months in the making. It's the gathering of resources of people and getting the volunteers of people and so forth, and then collaborating on what they would think is relevant content and uh, value of what needs to be done. And from that, there's a progression of content that gets developed, and you're always trying to be forward thinking. What is the thing that by the time the conference happens is going to be most discussed? Okay, so you in probability guess what you think is the most relevant things to talk about at that time. Then you have to develop and vet and discuss and everything else, agendas and who's speaking and confirmations of those speaking, and then there's the presentations. And if you're really good at it, you review the presentations and make sure they're consistent with the method and the message that you wanted out of the context of it, that it matched what you wanted to be. And all that has to coalesce together at the actual conference. So you're like forecasting. 12 months ago, you're forecasting what you're going to talk about as being relevant at the time of the conference. You can hit the mark really well, and then there's times where you're just a half step off. Um, Fortunately, there is always a dynamic progression of content that maybe this was the topic we thought it was going to be, but as time went on, that relevancy deteriorated. But there was a great substitution topic that we could put in without missing up deadlines associated with making sure that we have that content ready and available. So, because of that, conferences always have a certain uh, pace issue with it, where it's like, okay, um, I'm sorry, it looks distracted because I'm actually typing some replies to some people that are on our other channels watching us. Sorry. So I was answering some question because there was a question came up about details and events and some things. So with that in mind, um, conferences have the hope that they land close to the mark. Um, some conferences are amazingly spot on. It depends on the dynamicy of the content creators during the whole process so that they literally can be flexible almost up to the point that the conference itself happens. Certain presenters, I was always proud of myself to being one of those, could be flexible in their content so that yes, this was topic A that we were going to do when we first thought about it 12 months ago. Even 6 months ago we felt that topic A was still strong, but it looked like topic B was beginning to creep up. And then a few months out from the conference, topic B is more important than topic A now, and that we could shift gears and make topic B the prep. Plus, there's also marketing logistics with conferences that create limitations. There has to be a hard stop to some things because for people to make the decision of attendance, you have to give them the reason to attend, and you can't keep doing TBDs, to be determined, and your topics or your agendas. People want to know if there's value to what you're going to present for them to make the financial decision, and it's a large financial decision to make it to these conferences. And it's not just the attendance fee that's required for this. This is very much about uh, travel expense, travel expense while you're there, accommodations, travel expense in the sense of transportation while you're there, costs associated for being there, food and so forth and so on. And then, of course, the actual sessions themselves. So it's a bulk amount. And we had in the discussion on the show 353 about conferences, their inception, the value proposition of attendees and vendors and speakers and so forth, the math metrics of determining the value proposition of going and attending. um, but that also has to go for the creators and the founders of these conferences. They have to be financially viable. You can't have a financially draining conference. It's meant to at least cover its own cost. So that's where you see these fees to get in, because there is a break point based on attendees. Because as much as everybody says, "Boy, that's really expensive for everybody walking the door," there's a lot of people walking in the door that aren't paying that price you see. Speakers are gratis in as the compensation for speaking and contributing content. Vendors receive passes according to what their level of vending costs are. Sponsors and so forth receive passes. Um, Press, I'm going in as a press card. That's covering the fact that I'm going to be adding content to their content. And as such, that's a value proposition for them. So there's a margin of all of that, plus the actual hard costs of it, because these venues, especially venues that can accommodate the size of the audiences that these are related to, are not cheap, very expensive, and everything about them is very expensive. We talked about it from the vendor's booth perspective, in show 353, but the cost factor from the the director of the conference is pretty astronomical too, because that commitment of finances of locking in those dates for that space are paid for. That dollars, those checks go out. And if nobody shows up or something like COVID happens and it has to be canceled, that's when contract negotiations go with cancellation policies and da da da. But there's always a cost for everybody. Cost for the venue, cost for the people that have to cancel it, what have you. So that's where you see a lot of these prices coming in to these conferences. So I highly recommend, if you feel comfortable safety wise traveling, these in-person conferences are incredibly valuable for the networking, primarily. Number one, first and foremost, getting back out in front of people, the changing faces of our industry, reconnecting to people you do know, and connecting to people that you've yet to meet. Absolutely critical. Second best, take in the action items in agendas, things that will give value to what the expense was that got you there. So when you go back to your home base, there's a value of dissemination of the data that you brought, that you brought back something that was worth the cost of getting you there. Key and paramount. The third is personal ability. The personal feeling that you have of not just the networking and the data that you're collecting, but the awareness of feeling that you have some sense of the direction of where things are going. There's trends to every conference. There's directions and guidances. There's always the main theme to the conference. There's always the keynotes. Those are the benchmarks associated with the true presentation of data value, content value to the conferences. Don't diminish that. Don't think that this is about feeling good and learning how to personally actualize yourself as some keynotes get thrown in. These conferences have a very strong purpose to the industry. Um, it's necessary to hear outside of your own voice because it's easy for you to have a very conceived person. I fight this. I think a lot of people fight this every day. Nobody thinks wrong. What they think right isn't always right. And that's where you have to listen to other people's voices. Realize that what you consider a priority might not be a priority in perception to somebody else. Not any lesser, just different. Sometimes you're flat out wrong. What you think is one way is provable to be another way. It gives you the chance to listen and participate and open your mind up to think of what other variations are. So by all means, take advantage of any opportunity you have to go to these conferences that you can financially afford. I do like the fact that the conferences like Jackie's APAC, the rock conference she has in Singapore, that she is doing a virtual component of it because there are logistic limitations for people that would benefit to be there, would want to be there, have no issues being there except for one, which is the ability of time to be there. So offering it available for that is very cool. Um, I'm hoping that the content that is shared at the Americas conferences will eventually make it into general mainstream dialogue and content for those people who are unable to personally attend because the content value proposition from their agenda looks really, really good. And I look forward to that being disseminated into more and more discussions and content that HSMAI shares over the next few weeks because as we know, data and content and perceptions get stale real fast because times change very quickly. So with that, we kind of covered the conferences and agendas. I want to hit a couple of news things that I find interesting. Um, One is for those that aren't familiar with it or have not kept immediate pair to it is um, the U.S. will be ending COVID-19 testing requirement for air travelers entering into the country. Right now, for you to know, is going to Europe, for example, you have no requirement to get tested while you're there, and quarantine restrictions in case you don't test or you test positively for it. Um, so there's that. But for anybody coming back in, U.S. citizens and international travelers, there is a testing requirement to come into the U.S. That puts a kind of a cloud over the expectation that if you do test positive, which can happen very easily, is your travel is getting much more expensive and it is puts in jeopardy your entire travel because quarantining requirements and what have you makes it very challenging. So the fact that they're taking this off is just letting you show again, COVID hasn't gone away. Our mitigation of the expansion of COVID is the mandatory testing, the mandatory masks, the mandatory requirements for travel have been pretty much taken off the board with the expectation it's up to everybody to individually choose their success of not catching COVID and making their trip getting sick worse. Um, so, with that, I do want to talk about one other interesting thing. So, the points guy, which is it's kind of funny. I've watched him from being a single dude that was putting content out there on a average looking website to being a power influencer when it comes to points values for cards and usages. And now he's getting into more and more of the news space as to what's going on. He's covering the fact that the five CEOs of major hotel chains got together in State of the Industry conversation at the NYU International Hospitality Industry Investment Conference in New York at the Marquee. And his title of the article, and again, these show notes will be is Hotel CEOs on Price Gouging, Daily Housekeeping, and Mini Bottles of Shampoo, which I thought was interesting. Um, in the consensus of conversation, which he cut down to some highlighted points, he says hotels have their heads above the recession clouds. Um, the hotel CEOs responded that they do not see recession as a negative impact for their profitabilities. I'll leave that statement for a moment because I want to get to something else. They also point out don't book in China trip anytime soon. China is just emerging from lockdowns and internet restrictions, international travel restrictions. That's a question mark still because of their hard edges to their reactions, the 100% closures, and you can read about the horror stories about that in the news. They're talking about the fact that, and a lot of these hotel brand chains invested very heavily in the emerging Chinese market with Western hotels. There's a lot of money on the line, just as in also with Russia and the restrictions being posed because of their atrocities. There's a lot of money that's sitting idle and lost in that market as well. Um, the one that, the two actually that I want to refer to, the strongest is Hotel Bargains. Never heard of them, is the company he had. Um, all of the CEOs are talking about this is an aggressive growth. Uh, Guests are willing to pay higher rates. I'm sorry, no. Nobody is willing to pay higher rates. They're begrudgingly paying higher rates. They're they're regrettably paying higher rates. Nobody's walking in the door saying, "Please, let me give you more money for the same thing I could get lesser to pay for lesser money for." The greed level in my mind of how this is perceived, like, "Hey, we're asking for higher rates and people are paying it," is exploitive. That's like walking up to a person walking out of the desert and saying, "Oh yeah, this 50-cent bottle of water is $5 now," and then willing to pay the $5. Yeah, because it's the only what they need, and they got to go. People need to travel. They need to get out of. Mental health has a very big component of this, um, and so people need to go do this. The reason why we see these point of sale transaction finances and so forth is that even though people know they're in excess of their income capability, they're willing to put themselves into debt to travel. That is the passion of travel that is driving these people. They don't have a willingness to pay a higher rate. They have a begrudging, unfortunate need to pay for a higher rate. And I would say that all well and fine if the CEOs aren't making 500% higher than their average hourly person that makes money, that it's not a greed factor. If they disseminated that into their entire infrastructure and paid everyone so that they would have the solution to their labor conundrum, because if they truly shared the income value of the business that people are working hard for, they would not have a labor problem. There would be a willingness of people to join their team because not only did they get the compensation, but they would get the recognition and the advancement opportunities. This pyramid relationship we have is what drives me nuts. And yes, this is a bit of a soapbox statement. The fact that they are bragging that there are no bargains drives me nuts. The fact that they are talking about growth, if the increased revenues and so on, drives me nuts. If we're truly in the hospitality business, and we're in a business, so I understand profits and the need for profits and needs to satisfy ownerships that have invested in companies and even reward the people on the success of their management of those companies. I'm not taking that anything away from, but the distorted percentages of who benefits from this, in my mind, exploitation of demand is what bothers me the most. And yes, that does lead up to another content about price gouging. What is the actual definition of gouging? Is the overinflation of a price in relationship to its true value? Well, obviously, if you look at the fact that if somebody that's dying of thirst and you're offering them water, the value of that water, perception wise, is incredibly high. So technically, you're not gouging them. You're simply making sure that you're getting compensated for the value that that person sees that product. That's how they're getting around this. They're not talking about it as a price gouging aspect of it. They're saying, hey, there's so much demand here. We can just keep raising prices because people are willing to pay them. Wrong words, wrong implication, wrong strategy. There is a yieldability and a value proposition. Totally think it. They're wanting to swipe any negative numbers that they've had in the past 2 years as fast as they can, which is their purpose in business. But at what cost? Because those people that are willingly paying higher rates and not feeling, and not, and then they're thinking they're not being gouged by doing it. Okay, will remember the fact that we don't have staff to provide the service levels that that price should dictate. If I'm going to drop that kind of money in a place, I expect a very high level of service and or value to what I'm getting to somehow compensate for the high prices. We are not providing that across the board. There's exceptions to all of this. So for that reason, I say it makes me very stressed that they're complaining about labor. They're toying out, oh, what pandemic? We're back to everything's great and wonderful. Oh, we're not worried about international things because we're doing so good with everybody that's willing to pay higher rates. I find it to be a very callous, non hospitality perspective associated with that. I find it very frustrating. Um, Nothing to be fixed about it from my individual perspective, only that to voice my personal opinion on a platform that I have here to do so. Can't change it, um, but it's in the sense of large senses. But to at least be somebody that stands out of the group and says, raises their hand and says, "Look, nobody's willing to pay a higher price." And what I'm paying now compared to what it used to be charged for, not inflationary variations and everything else, but literally you have blown up the price compared to what it was at a time that you can actually say, wait a minute, that was just that price back then. And this goes to gas companies and everything else. We can say this about all these things is, wait a minute, you don't call that gouging because you see it as because I'm willing, because of my sincere interest in the product, to pay it, that you're not gouging me for charging me that much. And that I'm willing to pay it. That's a wrong word. Okay. Uh, I'm begrudgingly doing it, whatever. Um, Nobody wants to pay for more than what they have to, plain and simple. So if companies truly want to take advantage of the opportunity that this really does create, which is if you don't gouge them in pricing and you do give them value of product and you disseminate the revenues that you are making in a way that it literally wipes the slate clean of why people wouldn't want to work with you as an organization, um, you'll be able to take full advantage of the consumer sentiment, as fickle as you think it is, with them overwhelmingly being happy to think that they'd be working with a business that is seeing them in the priority that they keep saying they are, which is customer guest first. That's a statement. Just like back when the pandemic first started, we're a family organization, aka furlough everybody on a muted Zoom call. We don't follow what we preach. And I think that it's necessary for us to evaluate the verbiage that we're using, the business modicum that we're using, and to realize the impact that of the things that we're like labor that we're complaining about. So with that, at the end of our hour, that was my soapbox speech for the day. Thank you for the patience and listening through that process as well. We will be having a podcast that will help review some of these processes as well, plus some really cool tech stuff on some tech, things that are using some of the new tech features that we just talked about earlier in the show. We're going to bring into some apps that work specifically and talk about their functionality and so forth on the podcast. So I hope you join us there as well. For everyone that attended the HSMA APAC in Singapore, I hope you had an enjoyable, wonderful time, both in person and also virtual. For those that will be joining me at the HSMAI's marketing and rock conferences and hopefully high tech, once I get my press pass access to that. I look forward to seeing you. Please come up to my table where I do the broadcasting, say hi that you watch me on the show, maybe even throw you in front of the camera and we do a little dialogue about some stuff as to what you've seen at the shows themselves. Would love that opportunity. You, of course, can reach me via email anytime at lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. I answer each and every email related to the show and the podcast. Until next Friday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern U.S. time, we will simulcast this at a more comfortable time zone for our APAC friends and European friends. 11:30 a.m. Sydney, Australian time, 11:30 a.m. London time on Wednesday. We will simulcast this same show back again so they get some more reasonable time for them to watch. If you watched us live, as I know you have on several platforms, thank you for your time today, the privilege of your time today. And I look forward to talking to you all next week.
And that can happen to you too, but it doesn't happen to everyone. It happens if you work for it. But we're here to mentor you along the way. And just the sad part about it